You know, back when I was in the academy, we would follow every toast with a song.
So we're recording now, but we'll introduce the episode in a few minutes.
Okay.
So Dad and I are talking about the Tomorrow War, and we're talking about the nature of time. And Dad and I have both seen the Tomorrow War. For you at home, if you haven't seen it, it's on Prime. It stars Chris Pratt. Came out around 4th of July 2021.
Right.
It basically, the story is there's a war in the future where aliens have basically decimated Earth, so the forces of Earth in the future are somehow going back in time to recruit soldiers from the present to fight in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Though somehow you can't go backwards in time, even though these people do.
Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the problem with the film.
Well, the thing is, what they said is time only moves in one direction. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what does that mean? That was the kind of the critical thing.
This is completely my bullshit, and this is my reading into string theory, and just kind of what binds the universe together. You know, looking at time from a causal standpoint, it's hard to sit here and say that, like, time ever freezes or stops. It's always constantly moving, and it's been moving since the Big Bang, which, you know, if you believe in that theory, that's when the universe at one point was condensed down to the size of a pen, or the head of a pen, which contained everything you see now around us, folks, and exploded outwards and is continuously expanding outwards, theoretically. There's also theories that it might actually be not regressing, but like wobbling in and out at times. But that's just a theory. Again, we haven't reached the edge of the universe. We don't know. The point I'm bringing up is I've always had this theory that time is kind of like the point of a needle anyway, and the fact that it has to move forward by the nature of what it is. It can't do anything else. And I kind of use the illusion of a needle because, like, you can only really push forward or pierce with a needle. And I think time can only really push forward. Now, can you go backwards with a needle once it's in? Like, yeah, you can pull it out, but it's not like the needle's going backwards. Like, it's left a wound. It's left a mark on you, you know? Or the fabric. Skin, fabric, whatever. That needle has left a puncture mark. I think time, in many cases, is that way. It can't stop, and the movement of time that we measure in our days, our seconds, in our events, on a cosmological scale, is intentionally never-ending because it can't ever end. Even though we know at some point there is going to be a heat death of the universe, but there's no theory that says that that is the only thing that is going to happen moving forward afterwards. We don't know what happened before the Big Bang, and astrophysicists and cosmologists are constantly working at that question as well in the hopes of figuring that out one day. But in general, I think time is kind of pressing forward. And the reason I bring this up, because in the Tomorrow War, they have this very interesting idea that the aliens actually arrived much, much earlier. And and it's actually them building their invasion over time and taking us out over time versus, having something like Independence Day where an entire army kind of shows up.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think that in itself is a very interesting idea. It creates some. It creates some interesting narratives first. It builds into kind of like the conspiratorial stories of aliens have always been among us, Men in Black. Even Star Trek, when they started doing episodes of Enterprise, they did episodes going back in time where like the Vulcans were having, um, I guess, research groups among us.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that
Yeah.
episode?
Yeah. They went back to some little Pennsylvania coal mining town. Right. Yeah.
But
They were doing the same research into understanding the culture before First Contact. The same thing that in Next Generation they would do.
do you know what that actually makes First Contact, the movie and the event, a little bit more interesting because the entire story of Zefram Cochrane is that he launches his converted nuclear missile up into space, launches his warp engine, and the Vulcans pick up the warp trail kind of accidentally while passing through our solar system and, land and make first contact. Uh, describing what we just talked about, if they had already been here to Earth and lived among like humans in even small Midwestern towns, I doubt that they actually were just happening upon us when Zephyr Cochrane makes his journey. They probably already had a ship that's constantly patrolling our sector, kind of just waiting on us. That's an interesting idea too. I think when it comes to the idea of alien civilizations we might meet in the immediate future,
Well, see
since
that
we've been
that
talking about UFOs a lot on the show.
that fits with some people who
Sorry, go
believe that
ahead.
that fits in with some, the UFO theorists, if that's the right term, that believe the UAPs we're seeing now are scout ships, and that the motherships are out beyond Pluto, so that there's might be alien civilizations according to these ideas that
Hmm.
are many alien civilizations that we have gained their attention and they're just monitoring us for various reasons at this time. And
The 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 scientific response to that from some of the larger names in the field, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and Brian May, and names like that, is they often rebut that argument with the idea that we are such a backwater that
right,
aliens wouldn't pay attention to us.
right,
Though the problem with the UAP or the possible UFOs is that argument's kind of out the door now.
uh-huh,
If those are UAPs or they are UFOs and they are extraterrestrials, and let's say the government does know, the entire idea that we're some backwater has to go out the window somewhere. We're of value to someone in the universe. They're
uh-huh,
here for a reason. Even if they're here for entertainment to watch like these dumb rednecks that they sometimes pull off the planet's surface to fuck with, like
uh-huh,
we provide them some sort of value. At the same time, Stephen Hawking had the opinion that it was probably good that we didn't run into aliens because if we ran into a civilization, based on what he viewed of our civilization being warlike, he expected extraterrestrial civilizations that we ran into to also be warlike, which
yes,
kind of fits into like the Halo storyline.
uh-huh,
Um, I the more I think about it, the more I honestly believe that that is more of a pessimistic argument than it is anything based in real science. Um, I think if you have a civilization that has progressed to the point of interstellar travel or even extra dimensional travel, um, let's say they are outside of Pluto waiting on us for some reason. Well, that means they've developed the technology not only to travel, but to actually stay in place somewhere in the galaxy and wait.
Well, I think the point you're making is if they wanted to come get us, they would have come.
Yeah, this
Why
would
would
have
they
been over
wait?
tomorrow, or
Yeah,
yesterday, or 10 years ago,
right.
or at Roswell. Like this would have been, if those aliens that crashed at Roswell, let's say Roswell happened, if those aliens crashed at Roswell and the people that those aliens came from were dead set on getting their people back and looking at us in terms of a hostile race, because if you follow the story, we take their technology and we basically take the bodies of their dead. Um, if we're following Hawking's line of thinking that humans are brutal and therefore aliens would be brutal too, they would look at us as brutal savages, and we'd be up to our necks in little gray men fucking us up since the 50s. But it just doesn't. It just hasn't happened like that.
Right.
So I actually think, if I may conjecture before we get into the show, um, a lot of our conversations recently have been about like the possibility of these extraterrestrials being in contact with our government and like what are their intentions. Um, I would like to think, and maybe this is me being naive or fanciful, but I would like to think that these little gray men, or whatever they look like, um, the Greys, I would like to think that they are more in line with um, the Asgard from Stargate, because the Asgard and Stargate are kind of little gray men, but they have used their technology with the idea that we are cousins to them, and therefore they were waiting for us. And when it comes time to fight the Goa'uld, they stand alongside us. I I kind of have a feeling that if these little gray men are truly up there in our sky and they are not attacking us, and they're not attacking our aircraft. That's the other thing too that I don't think anyone's really taking into account. We keep talking about how our veterans in the U.S. Air Force and the Navy keep spotting these things. It's not like these aliens aren't spotting them back. And if they're spotting them back, one of two things. I expect one of two things to happen. Honestly, at some point, um, it's going to look like Top Gun, where either the aliens are going to turn around and they're going to engage with us, and we're going to have a fight with some MiGs, or the aliens are going to get really close to us. They're going to invert, and they're going to give one of our pilots the finger before rushing back off into the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
But like they're not making contact, and I think that is something that should be paid attention to as well. Uh, the entire conversation right now, I think, around UFOs and the intention of aliens being possibly malevolent, it's just not panning out necessarily at the moment to say that, unless there's some sort of long-term gain or something that we're not seeing. But we seem to be destroying our environment. If they wish to destroy our environment, they would have the technology to do it instantly, it seems. Uh, if they wanted to invade us and stop us, it doesn't seem like it would be very hard considering how hard we're working to destroy ourselves.
Correct. Yes.
So I, I just no longer believe this stance that these aliens are necessarily malevolent or have ill intentions toward us. If they did, I think their behavior would show that by now. Because we've had decades and decades and decades of UFO testimony and people looking into this, and constant videos now. Where are the
Well,
attacks?
let's move on to the episode. But my last comment would be, if a big cube is spotted coming our way, then we can definitely probably say, "Oh shit."
Oh, if the cube's coming our way, I have no idea what we do.
Yeah.
Actually, I think we might be fine if the cube's coming our way. Remember that scene where Picard pulls out a Tommy gun and just blitzes those Borg?
Oh, that's true. At
Like,
least, at least in the United States, it's safe because of all the guns we have.
there's a discussion of whether adaptive shielding is uh, too advanced for a bullet.
There you go. Right.
Okay, so
Okay.
that was a fun 14 minutes. Let's get into the episode. Um, okay, good. I'm on the right connection. So, 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Where No Bubs Has Gone Before, Star Trek The Next Generation podcast hosted by myself, Jay Reckward, and my father, Jake Reckward. We're recording this for the benefit of my son, Ben, but we know so many great Star Trek The Next Generation fans are out there, so we're recording and releasing all of these podcasts for free out on YouTube. How are you doing tonight, Jake?
I'm good, Jay. And you?
Fine, we're going to continue the conversation like we haven't been talking for 15 minutes. Um, so, tonight we are reviewing Star Trek The Next Generation Season 2, Episode 14, The Icarus Factor, which debuted on April 24th, 1989. And I have mixed feelings about this episode. I don't know how you feel about it. In some ways, it's a good character episode, but I think in terms of like the actual structure of the narrative and the way that it's paced, it's not good. So it's a so-so episode for me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I my note was that it's really um, concentrates on or focuses on relationships,
Hmm.
and it's not so much even science fiction, other than it being on a starship in the future. And the main story seems to be the relationship between Kyle Riker and Will Riker, and you know the secondary one is Worf dealing with
Right.
his right of ascension.
Which I actually think is the better story of the two. So let's dig into the episode real quick just to
Yeah,
get
please.
people up to speed what's going on. So the USS Enterprise D is en route to Starbase Montgomery. Well, we'll get into that. They're en route to Starbase Montgomery in the hope that the base can provide consultation regarding a minor readout anomaly in engineering. Uh, Data believes the anomalies are insignificant, but both Riker and Picard think it's necessary to investigate the issue. Uh, it also happens that the Enterprise is heading to Starbase Montgomery anyway, where they are going to exchange personnel. On the way, it is actually discovered that Picard has been keeping a secret and informs Commander William Riker that he has been offered the captain's chair on the USS Ares, which will depart for the Vega Omicron sector, which is stationed months away at high warp. Uh, Starfleet wants to utilize Riker's impeccable skills as an explorer and diplomat to ascertain what the situation is there in that sector. So, a very big episode for William Riker. It, in many ways, I think sets the tone for the character going forward. Also, at play is a more minor storyline with Worf, and as you mentioned, his Ascension anniversary, which is discovered by Wesley Crusher in a minor comical mystery with Data and Geordi. But getting into the story, two things. First, the readout of the dilithium crystals. You know, dilithium is used to power the warp engines in the Star Trek universe, and later on in Star Trek Discovery is actually a highly sought after substance when warp drive becomes something that is actually very hard to do. But we never really get any discussion or explanation of how dilithium works or where dilithium really comes from. in Star Trek, the original series, and I don't believe they really ever cover Next Generation. Um, dilithium seems to be that magical substance. And I was wondering what you thought of the engineering built around crystals and kind of the use of dilithium in the story.
Um, I've never really thought about that, but you bring up a good point. It seems like dilithium is it's treated as a fuel, but
Hmm.
since the warp drive is pretty much where the immense energy comes through is through a mixture of matter and antimatter, it's almost like the dilithium acts as a catalyst of some sort between those two entities mixing together and self-destructing and energy being, you know,
I
recovered
think it
from it.
is I think it is a medium where they take matter and antimatter and they basically throw the dilithium, and the dilithium basically refracts it into the energy needed to power the warp engines, whatever the matter or substance that is created when matter and antimatter combined. I think whatever dilithium is, it's that thing that helps those two adhere together.
Yeah, that's why I say the word catalyst, right?
Right.
But a catalyst actually that's wrong on my part because a catalyst uh, provides a surface on which a chemical or reaction can take place, but the catalyst itself is not consumed. So in this case, it seems like it's more akin to what you said, in that the dilithium is consumed in this case because it has to be resupplied. The crystals break down, they
Right.
degenerate.
Well, it's very interesting to have um, a crystalline structure break down because crystals in general are pretty resilient in terms of passing light and energy through. Scientifically and in terms of industry, we actually use crystals a lot for energy transfers and consumption. But it's always interesting to me that, and we'll see it in a later episode this season, where dilithium wears down to the point where you can't use a little bit of it, but even if you have a few basic shards, you can still like initiate a warp jump. So one question that I don't think we ever really get answered, and maybe we have to look into it, or some intrepid fan out there will answer for us. Um, there's really no explanation on how long a dilithium crystal lasts, or if there's some other substance to like power the Enterprise. Like for example, what are the impulse engines running off of? Is everything basically powered by the warp engine? Um, I think that those are technical questions that are probably left out of the world building intentionally.
Well, here's something just to read. I just thought, well, I'll Wikipedia dilithium. And it says dilithium is depicted as an extremely hard crystalline mineral that occurs naturally on some planets. It is believed that this material exists in more than three dimensions at the same time, and this is somehow
Hmm.
related to its uh, properties. When placed in a high frequency electromagnetic field, eddy currents are induced in its structure, which keep charged particles away from the crystal lattice. This prevents it from reacting with antimatter when so energized, because the antimatter particles actually never actually touch it. Therefore, it is used to contain and regulate the annihilation reaction of matter and antimatter in a
Ah,
starship's warp
okay.
core, which otherwise would explode from the uncontrolled annihilation reaction. Though low quality artificial crystals can be grown or replicated, they are limited in the power of the reaction they can regulate without fragmenting, and are therefore largely unsuitable for warp drive applications. Due to the need for natural dilithium crystals for interstellar travel, deposits of this material are, much like real world equivalents such as oily, a highly contested resource, and as such,
Hmm.
dilithium crystals have led to more interstellar conflict than all other reasons combined. In the original series, dilithium crystals were rare and could not be replicated. In Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, Spock recrystallized a Klingon bird of prey's decaying dilithium through exposure to high energy photons, as generated by 20th century fission reactors.
It's it's interesting because the stories never really touch on it. And even in Discovery, which I know you haven't watched yet, dilithium is never really treated as this item of scarcity, but the way you just described it, it really is. If this is the thing that started the interstellar wars between multiple species,
Right. Oh,
you know,
here's one other note. The streams, as shown in the series, the streams of matter, deuterium gas, and antimatter, antideuterium, that's interesting,
yeah.
directed into crystallized dilithium are imbalanced. There is usually much more matter in the stream than antimatter. The annihilation reaction heats the excess deuterium gas, which produces plasma for the nacelles and allows faster than light travel. In addition, most starships use this plasma as a power source for the ship's systems. In the series Star Trek Enterprise, this was referred to as an electroplasma system, a backronym for the term EPS, which was used in all the
Okay.
series except the original series to refer to a ship or station's power system. The
Yeah,
specific
the EPS
details of
conduits.
the specific details of this reaction were officially established in the Star Trek Next Generation series and technical manual. In earlier works, it was not clearly defined. So there you go.
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So we've answered we've learned a lot.
We have.
Yes.
It's very interesting though that we don't have a lot of stories about the scarcity of dilithium and like how that interplays with interstellar politics and society.
Right.
Because
Well,
it seems like it's something that they would need to, if dilithium is powering the ship, that means it's also powering the replicators. That means
well,
down on Earth, like they have just a big chunk of dilithium someplace that's kind of
yeah,
powering cities.
yeah. That's what I got from that article I just read as well.
So, I'm curious why we don't have more dilithium stories. Anyway,
Right.
let's move on.
Sure.
So this is another diversion to a starbase, and a starbase Montgomery. It seems like there are so many star bases, and I think we may have mentioned this previously. It seems like there's so many star bases throughout the Alpha Quadrant, especially for Federation territory, that they really do have a sophisticated system of distribution and networking that not only allows them to take people from A to B relatively quick, but from a strategic standpoint, it seems like they are pretty well covered to defend their territory from someone like the Romulans.
Hmm.
I was wondering if you had any more reflections on kind of the star bases and
No, I guess another thing that we just pointing out that we could investigate further is there any uh, in the Star Trek stories on Memory Alpha something? Is there a map of the Alpha uh, quadrant
yes.
in 3D that would show what the location of those
Ooh.
all the star bases are?
A 3D map is a very good question. I'm not sure. I know that there is canonically a 3D map, and you actually see it in season 1 of Next Gen. Uh, I think it's that episode where Riker and Picard beam down, and they have to kill the slug thing in that commander.
I'm not
They
remembering that.
these kind of parasitic creatures take over
Oh
Starfleet
yes, yes,
Command.
yes, yes. Right. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
There's a map on the wall that shows the Alpha Quadrant in
Right.
3D, but you
Right.
see it in far you see it far away, and it's in like 3/4 relief. But I'll see if I can find an Alpha Quadrant map that's in 3D.
Okay.
Um, so let's dig into Kyle Riker. So he's a civilian advisor and strategic attaché, quote unquote, a tactical advisor, as well as being William Riker's estranged father. No, it's a very interesting thing when we see civilians come on board the Enterprise and work with Starfleet in some sort of official capacity. This is also a very interesting delineation of duties because Kyle Riker is there, I think, and this is something I kind of showed up to the episode to argue for, and I wanted to know what you thought about it. Um, Kyle Riker is there as a military advisor to look in on his son and judge his son from a military perspective. Because I think there's the worry that whatever is in Vega Omicron, the Vega Omicron sector, Riker might not just have to be a diplomat and explorer. He might have to get down and dirty with what's ever there. It might be hostile. And I think that they've sent this quote unquote tactical advisor to take a measure. Here's what I would argue. Do you know what I think Kyle Riker is and why he's so estranged and why he's been traveling and why he has been in so many battles and why he may have lost his wife and why we're kind of putting all these questions together? Um, I think Kyle Riker's a mercenary. I really do. Like, I was just putting the things together. I was watching this episode. Okay, he's a civilian, but he's working directly with Starfleet at a very high level. Like, they let him walk onto the bridge of the flagship and into the captain's ready room and into the observation lounge. He gets one-on-one time with the commander of a starship. At the same time, like, he has a history of traveling around and dealing with conflicts.
Well, that makes sense because at first they describe him as a civilian advisor and strategic attaché, but I think then when they
Right.
introduce him, they refer to him as a tactical advisor.
Right. And I think if you look at the rough and tumble nature of the man, like, he's willing to beat his son in an Ambu Jitsu ring. I think he has the marks of someone who's not just a quote unquote advisor. I think that this guy has probably gone into battle a few times in his life without Will knowing. And we never really get an explanation of why uh, Will Riker's mom died. If she died of illness or if there was a conflict or an accident. We
I was just
just
going to
have this
say,
kind of.
I was just going to say with your idea that him being sort of a mercenary, sort of an Eric Prince, even, that kind of
Yes.
guy, that, I mean, it sounded like when he was before Riker's mother, Riker, Riker was how old when his mother died? 7 or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Here, let me bring up his here. I have Will Riker's profile right here. Just keep talking. I'll answer your
Well, if
question.
he if Will Riker growing up in Alaska, if he had somewhat of a normal childhood up to the time to his mother's death, he had this relationship with his father. I mean, the father was in his life,
Oh,
and then
Betty died when Will was 2.
two. Wow.
Yeah,
So okay, so
and the Rikers remained in Alaska at Betty's wish.
okay, so
Yeah.
Riker really never knew his mother then, and his father seemed to have the personality where he was, this is kind of pointed out that he was very competitive. He had to kind
Mm-hmm.
of one up on Will, like the comment about the fish that Will caught, but his father, took a picture with him holding it as if he caught it and so forth. And then, at what point did Kyle Riker start to do his work, which may have kept taking him away from Will? We don't have any information. When did he kind of disappear?
So Kyle Riker completely abandoned Will by 2350 when Will was 15. And this is one of the things that Will holds a grudge against his father for over 15 years. I really think that like he saw Will at 15 and he's like, do you know what? This is not working out, and I need to go make money. So I'm going to go fight some wars. See you, kid. Well, like
Yeah, well, yes, yeah, I can see that, and this kind of jumps ahead. But when they get to we would discuss this offline in terms of the ridiculousness of ambu jitsu as
oh my god, the
a
worst
martial
martial art
art.
ever.
And it's like that was a weak point of the story, weak in the writing, even because after they have their little match, and he almost makes Will cry, and he says, "I love you, son." It's like, you know what? Just because you said that after it's been out of my life for 15 years, 30 years, fuck you, Dad. This is not making up for it.
Thank you. Like, one thing that I wanted to talk to you about in this episode is, I think in a lot of American fiction, there is often this depiction between fathers and sons of this competitive tension and this kind of natural tendency for us to get into fights or to be at odds with each other. And, growing up as a teenager, and, I was rebellious and did some dangerous things, but, like, I wouldn't say that we were ever truly at terrible, terrible odds with each other. But
No.
American fiction depicts it like we are just hate-filled enemies that can't stand each other. And I was wondering, like, was that how fathers and sons were depicted in the stuff that you were watching growing up? Because it seems like the fiction for me growing up, a lot of dads have not been great dads.
Um, Not that I recall, because I mean, hell, I grew up in the Leave It to Beaver generation, where you had,
Right.
everything was just hunky dory perfect.
Well, you
Under
also
the
had like Happy Days.
Oh
That was a
yeah,
family of a great
oh
dad. Or
sure, sure.
who played Matlock?
Andy Griffith.
Yeah, Andy Griffith, the Andy Griffith Show.
I mean, hell, even Bill Cosby was a good father on his show.
Jesus Christ, we went there. Um, the recently the recently freed Bill Cosby.
Right.
What a world we live in. But I find it very interesting that in 1989 there is this depiction of a very acrimonious relationship between father and son to the point where like it's kind of acceptable that they are going to get into fisticuffs or they're going to get into physical combat with each other. And it just, a lot of this seems very, from the outside writer's perspective that I take, um, a lot of this just seems very forced and convoluted.
Well, as we're talking about it, it kind of goes back to, well, how good of an episode is this? And that, what we're saying
Right.
is that if that's the main story, and there's little things that sort of spin off of that because it's about relationships, there's you know some explanation of the friendship that exists between Chief O'Brien and Riker, and of
Right.
course, there's a past connection between Kyle Riker and Dr. Pulaski, and
Which I think is very interesting as well. And actually
right.
helped feed into my he's a mercenary theory.
And then, Dr. Pulaski does provide Will with some perspective about his father and makes the admonition to him to jettison his emotional baggage. And
Which is
then,
such bullshit.
there's a conversation between Will and Deanna Troy that shows the depth of their connection. And then even Deanna and Kyle Riker have a counseling session, so to speak, which, kind of Deanna kind of puts it to him, and he walks out in a huff and so on. Um,
Well,
so
okay.
so so you have all these little spin-off things, but when you get to the end and it all comes to the Ambu Jitsu, it's like, so what? Fine. You're gonna
What?
where's your dad going now to be a mercenary, and when's the next time you're gonna see him? It's like,
Why the fuck did we do any of this?
right, right, exactly,
Kyle, why are you here to rile your son?
right.
Um, that's another thing too. Like So Kyle Riker uses his official status as a civilian attaché to get on board the Enterprise to interview his son for the potential seat on the Ares. But when he gets there, he does the worst job, like, reviewing his son for this position, where it's kind of already said that, like, if Will wants it, Will gets it. And this just seems superfluous and kind of a waste of Starfleet's time. And I'm really surprised that anyone okayed this. At some point, it would just, like I said, it just seems like superfluous.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it seems like Kyle Riker is kind of abusing his authority to have this emotional moment with Will that Will doesn't want. And, I agree with you. By the end of it, it doesn't really seem to be resolved.
Right.
Um, One thing that is interesting about the Kyle Riker and Troy conversation is that she makes a very important point that respect is earned, not bestowed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we started doing this show because we wanted something that Ben could listen to later on, in case he ever wanted to hear his father's voice and his Pop's voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering what your view is as a dad and as a parent about when it comes to the idea that respect is earned and not bestowed. How do you feel about that as a parent who's raised 3 kids now? And is Troy right in this case? Um, just how do you feel about that?
Oh, I think that's true. I think that you know what I try to do and your mom tried to do is, um, you know, raise our children so they could be not just functional adults, but they could really contribute to society and whatever they chose to do, and that was their choice, no pressure per se. That they kind of end up trying to make the world a better place.
Right.
And I think that mom and I, if we wanted to, um, you know, im- imbue you with those values, we had to show that ourselves.
Right.
So I think that respect is earned versus you have a parent or a father who, um, doesn't genuinely support his children and their growth and their maturation. Um, a father who, for reasons not his own, and this applied to the mother, a mother also, if due to circumstances beyond their control, they don't have a stable income, um, so that they have problems with substance abuse and so forth, then they choose to or put in a position that they cannot earn that respect from the
Mm-hmm.
children. And that probably has a lot to go about, with socioeconomic conditions, particularly for uneducated people in this country and people that are, don't make enough money because of what we've talked about in terms of, pay scale and the minimum wage and that sort of thing. So that if people are just struggling to survive, um, and turn to drugs and so forth, then you just it's very difficult for a parent to present a role model. And there's a lot of examples where children are in those sort of environments and they still figure out how to flourish, but it
Right.
isn't but it isn't because of the parent.
I, you know, Ben, if you're listening to this, um, is only about 17 months old at this recording. He's past 17 months old. I notice already that a lot of parents are one of two ways. Um, and this might be my naivety, and because I don't see what those parents go through every day. The I think there are a lot of parents who and I think I fall into this a little bit, who kind of hover or overparent a little bit.
Oh, you're talking about the term helicopter parent and so forth.
Not even helicopter parenting. I think helicopter parenting really did end a while ago. I
Hmm.
think that there's just a general anxiety that certain parents have over their kids now
Hmm.
because of the way the world is.
Hmm.
Um, and it also may be because of where I live in New York. Like, if Ben runs out into the road, no one's going to stop.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's kind of an anxiety with children when it comes to living in a city.
Hmm.
Even though that anxiety, I have to say, for posterity, when we later talk about this, has been toned down greatly in the post-pandemic world. Margot and I were walking around today and commented about how many people there really aren't in the city.
Hmm.
It really has emptied out. The point I'm trying to get to is, I think there's a lot of parents that really try to protect their kids, but I also think there's a lot of parents that ignore their kids and try to and sometimes treat their kids like a burden on their life.
Hmm.
And I feel bad for those kids because they didn't have a choice about whether they're here or not.
Right.
So even if you believe your kid's a burden, your kid is still your responsibility and deserves your attention more than anything. And it really
Yes.
does. Like, I can forgive the hovering, even the helicoptering parents, because at least they're paying attention to their kids. Um, there's a lot of parents that just don't give a shit and just don't watch and don't care. I think you said something interesting about how you and mom didn't really exert any pressure on the three of us, my two sisters and myself. I fully agree with that. I don't think that you or mom really pressured me into the life I chose or another one of your choosing, which a lot of parents do to their kids. And I think in many ways, one of the reasons we have such a better relationship than a lot of parents do with their children, especially their older adult children. I think primarily has to do with the fact that you let us become fully formed adults, while a lot of people my age really aren't allowed that opportunity. There really is this pressure of trying to figure things out, and it's not just parents, but it's also kind of the system itself. Um, I've you and I have had this conversation before, but they've never people listening to this have never heard of it. Uh, I remember when I was in high school, no, middle school, and they wanted us to figure out what our major was going to be in college. But both you and I have gone to college now, and you realize that once you get to college, you don't know what the hell you want to do, and it's very rare that you figure it out even by the end of it. Um, Especially today in 2021, you're very lucky to walk out of school and actually end up doing the thing that you would study for. Um, but there's this pressure that is placed on kids very early on to know what they're going to be, but by the time you're 12, you're somehow supposed to know what you're going to be doing when you're 25 and have a plan in your head for that. And I think it really kind of screws up a lot of relationships between parents and kids because parents are under this pressure where it's like, if I don't plan for my kids' future and they have no direction, it's a reflection on me not loving them, and I love them, so I don't want that to be seen. But on the other hand, it puts this pressure on the kid to have these really unrealistic goals and expectations. Like, a 12-year-old should worry about 12-year-old things, not 24-year-old things like a job and taxes and whether or not they're going to have enough money for school. Um, that's that's more of a reflection on society than it is on the child or the parent. But it's this kind of downward pressure that I think the system places on people. And I don't think you and mom bought into that. And I don't think you placed that downward pressure on us. If
Yeah.
anyone placed it on us, it was ourselves, the
Hmm.
ourselves being the kids.
Hmm.
And I think that that's important to note too. Maybe both about parenting and kind of the what you had to parent under. I think one thing that we never talk about when it comes to parents and what they have to deal with is the kind of world they have to parent within. We always just talk about how they parent. We never talk about where they're parenting or when they're parenting.
I think of a couple movies that address this, and two of them aren't serious. The one that was serious is Dead Poet Society, where there's
Oh
one
yeah.
character, Neil, who I think his father wants him to go to medical school or something like that. He puts a lot of pressure on him because they're, a wealthy family. In their private school, he wants him to go to an Ivy League school, and Neil, finds that he's really, very much into drama in the arts and so forth. And you know how that story ends, where Neil, when his father just does not respect his son's interest in drama and so forth, that Neil ends up killing himself. And then you have the other examples that are kind of funny, that parents letting their kids figure out what they want to do is, one is, it has a serious nature to it, is Risky Business with Tom Cruise,
Oh
you
yeah.
know. But the other one that's totally silly, of course, is Ferris Bueller.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I agree about Risky Business, but like Ferris Bueller is a sociopathic son of a
Yes,
bitch that
yes,
like
yes.
if that was my kid, I'm sorry folks, I'd be beating that kid every day. Like
And his friend,
so abusive, just so abusive.
and his friend is really even worse off than Ferris in some ways, when the car, with his father's car and so forth.
Well, like that in some ways is okay. So in some ways, Ferris Bueller does provide a good example for what we're talking about.
Right,
You're talking about the character of Cameron.
Cameron.
Um,
Right, yes,
I think that's what we're talking about in a way. I think there's parents who like look at their kid as a burden and don't pay attention to them and put their passions and their attentions into things that are like materialistic or
right,
sensual or experiential, where you know this, these children are having to figure all that stuff out on their own, and they're also
right.
looking at your example to see how you're dealing with those things.
Hmm.
So if you're not paying attention to your child, you're kind of also not paying attention to your own actions as you do
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
And I think, you mentioning that you and mom tried to lead things by example, the example that you set for us was like to work hard and be kind and stay focused and ultimately like keep to your family. You know, I I don't want to shit on anyone listening to this, but I think one of the best things about my family is that we have a level of closeness, even through tough times or in times where we don't want to be around each other. Um, there's a level of cohesiveness in my family that has always been there because we've had to suffer things together, especially my mom, who lost both of her parents at 13 and is, one of five, and they have a very close, cohesive relationship. Um, I think you taught us a lot of really good values, and but at the same time, you also bring up a good point. Like for all of those bad parents, you still have kids like Will Riker that become the commander of the USS Enterprise. Um, I have to ask you, how do you rate Kyle Riker as a father?
Oh, well, I don't have much respect for him because,
Yeah,
the way the story's written, he comes in, as we've said, he kind of shows up. He's, supposed to provide Will advice on, if he accepts the Ares captaincy, what his job will be, what to expect when he goes into this Vega Omicron sector. And, he really comes, we know, to try to reconnect with his son. And I don't think he does a very good job reconnecting with his son. But that's just the way the story's written. It's very weak.
well, I think one thing that, yes, that's a very good word, weak. Um, One thing this story does also explore is
Hmm.
Will's reluctance to take the captain's chair of his own starship, because career-wise, this is where he should want to be. He should be wanting his own command. Because the way it seems that it works is that you get your first command as a captain, and then you work there for a while, and then if you're really good, they give you a better ship, and then they give you a better ship, and then they give you a better ship until you're an admiral. Um, Picard had the Stargazer for a long, long time before he was given the flagship of the Enterprise. I think in some ways this is supposed to be a natural step for Will Riker, but the episode reveals the internal struggles of the character that are always at play. I actually love this episode from the perspective of revealing who Will Riker is on the inside and the things that he has to deal with. You know, it's not only his long-standing relationship with his father that provides him a lot of doubts, but like he really doesn't want to leave the Enterprise because he really doesn't want to leave Deanna.
I
And
think
there's
that's what.
always this, yeah,
Yes, I think that's one factor, and the other one, it said at one point that if he goes off into this Vega Omicron sector, it's way out there,
yeah,
and he doesn't know what the challenges might be. There might be nothing out there except to map it. Where he, as Picard says, he's got a very prestigious and responsible position as the first officer of the flagship. And
right.
if he really wants to, have challenges, which of course in the Star Trek Next Generation stories, there's always something unique going on. Part of his decision, in addition to not wanting to leave Diana, is to stay where he knows the action is going to be.
I think too there's an interesting interplay. You know that scene where Picard and Kyle finally meet
Yes.
and they're in Will's quarters?
Hmm.
I think there's a very interesting dichotomy that is presented there where Picard comes in, and in many ways, you and I have talked about in this season, they really played up the friendship and the camaraderie between Will and Jean Luc.
Hmm.
I think this episode really plays up kind of the father-son relationship between Jean-Luc and Riker, and how Riker really has turned Jean-Luc Picard into a surrogate father. And when
Yes.
his actual father shows up, the conflict between the two and the contrast between the two is so clear. Right
Yes.
before Kyle Riker walks into Will Riker's quarters, um, Picard is trying to do something I think all parents try to do with their children, and that's hype them up with the potential and wonder of what the world can be if they try something new.
Hmm.
Picard's really trying to get Will to take this captaincy because he thinks like Will's going to be really great at it. Um, Kyle is coming to Will so he can get validation for himself. It's not even really about Will; it's about Kyle.
Yes. It
Um,
is.
and I think that dichotomy there between Kyle and Picard is presented very well in that scene.
It is.
And I think
Yes.
part of the reason Riker doesn't want to leave yet is because he's finally having the relationships that he's been yearning to
Yes.
have all of his
Yeah.
life.
That's a very good point. Right.
And you mentioned Chief O'Brien and Riker having drinks in 10 Forward. It's not only the prestige, I think in many ways the relationship that Picard and Riker have set up, going back to the first season, Picard is on the bridge all the time, and he's very much the authoritative figure. He's very much the authoritative figure on the ship, but he's distant. He's the one actually dealing with things face to face on the view screen. I think what the scene with Riker and O'Brien shows, O'Brien being an enlisted engineer, is that Riker might be the surrogate big brother for the rest of the crew. Like, Dad is off actually having to do the job, but the guy who's taking care of them is Will Riker. He's the one sitting with the officers in 10 Forward.
Right.
He's the one walking with Deanna Troi to figure out crew assignments. He's the
Hmm.
one hanging out with Geordi and Worf and forming these friendships that, we've never seen Picard really do outside of his official capacity. Picard really spends his time alone. Will Riker spends his time with people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very, I think there's a very tough dichotomy that Will realizes he'd be leaving behind as well if he
Yes.
took the Ares.
Yes.
So do you, before we transition to the Worf storyline and the end of the episode, um, do you think Will's decision to not take the captaincy of the Ares is the correct one?
Um, putting aside the fact that he's a major character and he needs to stay involved in the
Yeah,
following
putting all
episode
that
of the
aside.
season. But yeah, I think that based on what we just said, if I were Will, um, the fact that the Omicron Vega
Big
Omicron
Omicron.
sector is it's out there. It might be something new to discover. It might be just months at warp speed to get out there and just map it. And there's nothing there, and he gets the experience of being a commander. But if he really wants to be where the action is, he needs to stay where he is. He has all the relationships he's formed, and I think you hit on something very important with the counterpoint that Jean-Luc Picard provides Will Riker as a father figure versus what Kyle Riker has done. I mean, when Kyle
Hmm.
Riker leaves, you know, uh, if I were Riker, I'd say, "Well, good, I got through it. He's gone. Maybe I'll see him another 15 years. Maybe I won't. Maybe I won't see him again. But I have somebody that I work for that nurtures me."
You're right. Right. Um, very well put. One last thing. It, as we know, Riker and Troy later get married and actually have children. That's revealed in Picard. They
Mm-hmm.
get married in Nemesis, but they later have children, which is revealed in Picard. It's very obvious that Will and Deanna Troy are meant for each other, and
Mm-hmm.
I think they both know that. And another big reason he's ultimately not leaving is because I think that scene that they have in her office is very indicative of how much the characters are so intertwined with each other that they really can't leave. They tried leaving once before, and now that they're brought back together, they're really not going to part again. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the narrative of the story really kind of tamps that down here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's transition real quick to Worf's storyline for a moment. So Worf is being listless, kind of disruptive, angry. He doesn't really want to be around any of his friends. And a young, intrepid Wesley Crusher notices that his friend Worf is having a hard time, Dad. Gee willikers. Um, and he decides to employ Data and Geordi in helping to figure out what's going on. Uh, I have to say this is a really fun storyline, and it's a very interesting look into Klingon culture. What did you think of Wesley's interplay with Worf and Wesley's interplay with Data and Geordi in terms of figuring out Worf's rite of ascension and the anniversary?
Thought that it, yeah, as you said, it was interesting that um, Wesley, I guess he's noticed it not just on the bridge, but in general, that Worf was very morose and so forth. And he takes the time to try to figure out what's going on with him. And he's proactive, where, as you said, he uh, enlists the help of Geordi and Data to figure out what's going on. And they pretty much quickly figure it out. But it's like no one else has thought about this, that he's the only, as far as we know, the only Klingon on the Enterprise. And he's having this, kind of life defining event and so forth. And he's got no other Klingons to share it with. So
Yeah,
it's a very caring thing that the crew does. Even Dr. Pulaski comes to the ceremony, wants to help him at one point, and they say, "No, let him be. Let him get through the pain stick gauntlet
Gauntlet.
that they set up.
So the pain stick gauntlet is interesting because on one hand, it's supposed to celebrate the warrior's bravery, and the warrior's actually supposed to reveal their deepest emotions while going through the ritual. At the same time, it's supposed to be done in the presence of family and friends and the people important to you. Like you said, Worf doesn't have any of his fellow Klingons, but his fellow crewmates stand in when the time comes. Uh, the thing I find interesting is Klingons, despite their um, kind of stoic, independent nature, really are communal people. They really do rely on being around other Klingons and having other Klingons help them enact their own personal rituals. It's not like Worf could take a pain stick and like stick himself, or have um, Geordi or Data stick him, or have other people, his crewmates stand there. He
Right,
had to have other Klingons.
right.
I find it an interesting reflection on Klingon culture as a whole that there really is this focus on kind of ritual and reenacting ritual and remembering ritual and really holding like the milestones in your life up as being really important. What do you think of Klingon culture from that perspective in terms of how they value their own milestones in life, but also like the communal nature of it? What's your reflection on the pain stick ritual in general? What do you think of it?
I think there is a, um, a real sense of community with the Klingons. I mean, it's you see it when we see them working together on the bridge of their ships and so forth. There's a very rigid order, but then there is, when they go into the mess hall, like that scene a couple episodes ago when Riker's you know, the uh, the Starfleet officer that's assigned over there. And we've done that
Right.
episode, haven't we? Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a very
On the
communal
paw. Yeah.
on the PA, and they're joking around and so forth. So it shows that they have a communal aspect. I mean, it was very much like sort of sort of like a Viking uh, dinner and so on, warriors and
Right.
so forth. And because they're a warrior culture, that's why the rite of ascension is violent in nature.
hmm You know, I find sometimes I've studied some warrior cultures in my time, and I find the fixation on pain and suffering pain and enduring pain always to be fascinating from a shamanic perspective. There is a lot of the stories that we tell throughout human history feature some sort of wounding and healing. And, part of what Worf is going through when he walks down this kind of path to pain is that they wound him, but by being wounded, he's able to reveal his deepest inner self. And by revealing his deepest inner self, he is affirming and therefore healing something in the act. Um, why do you think humans have this kind of fascination with pain and kind of incorporating it? Because even in Christianity, um, Catholics and even early Protestant movements featured flagellation. Uh, where do you think this kind of uh, focus or maybe fixation on pain comes from in the human psyche, especially when it comes to spirituality?
Uh, the only thing I can think of, it's something akin to if you do something physical to yourself or suffer some pain, it's an atonement for not living the way you should, for atonement for sins and so forth. I mean, that's kind of like what flagellation was about to some extent. Um, and I was also thinking, I think in African cultures and maybe some Native American cultures, there was some, very painful rites of passage where people would be,
Right.
put bone hooks into their skin and they'd be suspended, you know. Um,
Oh, in
And
Africa, there's several tribes that practice circumcision rituals that happen in public.
that's right, when they're adults. And you have the scarification that happens in African
Hmm.
cultures too. So,
Um,
yeah,
sorry, go on.
yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting question that you bring up because don't see that in a lot of Western cultures. Now, I'm thinking that the increasing popularity of tattooing in the United States and Europe and other places. Um, I wonder if that fits in with that because there's a little bit of pain involved.
I think part of I can speak to my own spiritual experiences with pain. Um, I think part of the reason people are using pain, and I'll use the story of Christ's crucifixion for example. Um, I think pain in some ways is an attempt to achieve an ecstatic or altered state, with the idea that if you achieve that ecstatic or altered state, you are somehow able to connect to a greater consciousness, whether you call that God or I think I think I think Klingons think that when they're going through that pain, they are connecting with their ancestors, and they're probably also connecting with Kalis,
Hmm.
who also went through severe pain in his story. You know, Christ goes through a severe amount of torture before he's even nailed up onto the 2x4s.
Hmm.
But when he's up there, so we're going to end on a fun note, folks. So, a lot of people don't understand what the real torture of Roman crucifixion is. It's not only that you're being hung. So the popular depiction of Christ with his legs hanging, kind of straight down, and him hanging by his wrists and ankles nailed to the wood, uh, that is physically impossible. The sheer weight of his body would literally tear his wrists from the nails. Like, he would have severe wounds and he would literally fall off the cross if they were to nail him in that classical pose. What the Romans actually did was they would nail your hands and your feet sometimes to the wood, but they would tie your arms to the crossbeam,
Crossbow, yeah.
which would keep you upright and straight, which would keep you awake, but also cause you to suffer greater environmental exposure. Believe it or not, you actually suffer less environmental exposure if you're laying down versus if you're standing up.
Well, I think there was also the issue that when you were put in that position, when you were
Well,
crucified, it made it very difficult to breathe. So for you to breathe, you had to push up on your feet for your diaphragm to work, but you could not maintain that for long because of the pain and fatigue. So there was a certain degree of suffocation as
well,
well.
the reason why that pain and fatigue and suffocation was agonizing and worse, the Romans would break your legs with a hammer before
Ah,
they
right,
they
right.
brought you up on the cross. Like, they would actually lift you up on the structure with after they broke your legs with the hammer. The part that they never show you in the Passion of the Christ or other popular depictions of Christ's crucifixion is the leg breaking scene. Like, they would have taken a maul and smashed Christ's legs apart and then hung him up. So Christ is not only struggling to breathe, he's internally bleeding below his waist. His bones are mangled. Um, in that moment of pain, Christ is a there's an argument that Christ is able to finally access the divine in God. Um, People from a shamanic perspective would argue that, but it's also known scientifically, and we've had some neurological studies that people in pain are actually able to um, access some not extrasensory perceptions, but we have more senses than the five that we commonly know or taught, and pain in some cases sharpen those extra senses that we're not taught about, but they may sharpen them acutely. So from a spiritual perspective, there's often the theory that if you induce pain, you may sharpen a person's spiritual perspective or their ability to access a spiritual realm more acutely. Um, it's both. It's one of the reasons why, like you mentioned, suspension by bone hooks. Um, there's a reason why there is a shamanic practice of being suspended by bone hooks, but outside of that, if you look at like the BDS scene or the leather culture scene, a lot of those people practice piercings, and one of the most extreme things that they do is pierce their backs and then hang from hooks through
Right.
their backs. And
Yeah.
that's a common thing that's being practiced there too. And I think that that is also an attempt to find an ecstatic state. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what Worf is clearly going through by the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost orgasmic for him going through this
Mm-hmm.
pain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like I said, I think that this is a so-so episode. Where do
Mm-hmm.
you think it falls in terms of season two, and um, where do you rank? Just general feelings. Where do you rank it before we go?
Give it, so is a good term. I think if you gave it a number on the 1 to 10 scale, you have to give it like a 4.
Yeah, I think
You
that's
know,
fair.
yeah, it's entertaining, but it's not really science fiction other than it's on the Enterprise. It's about relationships and so forth,
Right.
and other than the Worf story is good. It's very concise, but the whole thing with Riker and all that is just kind of messy. It's
It
not.
feels very flat.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Okay.
on that note, we will end this episode. Dad, thank you for joining me as always.
Sure, sure.
We'll be back next time for Star Trek season 2, episode 15, Pen Pals, which is actually a pretty fun episode.
It is. Yes.
But we'll see you all next time. Thanks, Dad.
All right, Jay. Thank you.